Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Thursday morning, so hopefully everybody had enough time to get their questions in. And just a warning up front, I still have that cold I warned everybody about for the weekly roundup, so I'll try my best to not make sick noises into the mic or anything like that, but my apologies in advance for any sniffles or anything. But let's jump in and see what we got. First up on Patreon, Alex Pedden said they're working with a Sony PVM 1354Q, which only has one set of BNC inputs that accept RGB or component video. Their MiSTer is connected via analog I/O to BNC using RGBS, and they'd also like to run a PlayStation 3 for some 4x3 video content without constantly swapping cables. Right now, they're using HD RetroVision component cables on the PS3, which they manually disconnect and reconnect each time. What's the best way to connect both the MiSTer and PS3 to the PVM without having to swap cables? So I think I have an easy answer for you, but I just want to be specific that my answer is for you and your setup. This would be different depending on all of the components, but you gave me all the clues I need to piece this together. And my suggestion for you is to get a cheap push button component video switch. I'll see if the ones I used to get on Amazon are still available. They're not the best, they're not going to last forever, but they're super cheap. Also get a set of HD RetroVision RCA to RCA cables, which are also not expensive, and then set your MiSTer to component video. You should be able to get just some basic BNC to component converters, super cheap, and run everything through that. And the reason I'm suggesting it is because number one, you just have one switch for everything. And then number two, one cheap switch. And then number two, you don't have to swap your PVM between component video and RGB modes. You could always just leave it in component. And that would be by far the easiest and cheapest way to go about doing it. You could do something like get a mixed input switch like the SVS, which is awesome. So you would just have one BNC input and then one component video input and then one probably D sub output, and you would just get a D sub to BNC cable. That would work even better. And it's a very high quality switch. However, you would constantly need to switch your PVM between RGB and component whenever you switched it, which might not be an issue at all. Depending on the PVM and how deeply you have it calibrated, that could be zero issue. It's two buttons to push and you're done. Or things could look very different when you switch between modes because you'd have to dig in and calibrate each. So that's my basic suggestion for you. But if you want more detailed suggestions, or if anybody else has a similar setup with different components, let me know. But I'll leave links to what I think would get you started on a budget. You know, you could of course grab a G comp and all the crazy stuff too if you wanted, but I think for a situation like this, you don't really need it. I think you could use the cheap stuff and have a perfectly good experience. Cam said my recent video about getting HDMI devices on CRTs cheap got them interested in streaming older content to their CRTs. They picked up an older Roku that is still supported and outputs composite video in 4x3 for playing old shows and movies, and it's been a ton of fun to tinker with, but now they want better quality video. They've been looking into higher quality alternatives to the cheap HDMI to composite converter that I showcased and came across some products from HD Fury and was wondering if I had any experience with them or other high-end HDMI to component or RGB converters. They'd be using them primarily on consumer-grade CRTs like the JVC D series, a very high-quality CRT, but they do have a BVM. They'd rather go all in on something really good than pick up something cheap and want to upgrade later. What do I think? Well, two answers to your questions. The first one for everybody listening, if you have a Roku with composite video output and you're looking for other HDMI to composite video converters, there's going to be no difference really. The Roku is going to do a great job and that's going to be all you need. But in your specific question of, hey, now how do I do HDMI to component or RGB for use in the JVC D series and BVM? That's when you would obviously get a step up in quality. But unless I'm mistaken, I don't have a lot of hands-on experience with the HD Fury stuff, but those are just digital to analog converters. So you would first need to convert the signal to 15 kilohertz, 480i or 240p, then use those converters to scale down to it. And they're pretty costly, but they should work great. So if you already have a solution like that, like you mentioned, you have a retro TINK5x, that could totally work. You could have things go into that. So you would first need like an HDMI to component video converter, and then you would put your streaming box through there. And then you should be able to use that to do the correct downscaling. Check out Marco's videos on that, definitely. I'll leave a link to that, of course. And then you should be able to do aspect ratio correction, cropping, any of that stuff that you need, and then use an HD Fury on the output side to go to either component or RGB. Probably component, I would suggest, because that way you could do that on, you could use it on both. But one thing I do want to mention, those converters, the HD Fury ones, are at least $100. I'm pretty sure. So just think about what you want your total setup to be like. Would you rather have something like an OSSC Pro, where all you would need is one of those HDMI splitters that is PS3 and streaming box compatible for the input side, and then have it output via its extra AV module? And that's a lot more expensive than just picking up a DAC. But check out Marco's videos on both the TINK5x and the OSSC Pro and decide which one might be a better overall fit. If you're just talking about video, I mean, they're both going to be excellent. But if you're talking about video games, some going to 240p, some to 480i, that's a pretty big difference for a total setup and total options. So I would just watch those videos and make your decision based on that, and then kind of go from there. Unless I'm missing something, and HD Fury has a downscaler, but I just don't think they have anything like that. Next, am I aware of any modern plug-and-play hardware that can convert aspect ratios? No, you would want to use one of the scalers that I talked about, TINK5x or 4K or the OSSC Pro, because while there might be modern plug-and-play hardware that could do it, it's probably going to be expensive and part of other video processors. And you could definitely get used equipment, but then you have the problem of, learning curve on something new. It's a product that's not supported. It's probably something you have to hunt down on eBay. Who knows how long it's going to last, maybe forever, maybe not. So I do prefer to recommend new solutions when possible. So I would absolutely start out by watching both of those videos and just kind of see what's the best for your setup and how you want to go about doing it. And if you have any more questions, fire away. Demo Kirby said they recently got one of the JT Studios Sega Saturn RAM cart shells for their Saroo, but they were wondering where they could purchase a label for it. They tried checking around online to see if anyone is selling cool labels, but no luck. Any recommendations? Yeah, definitely Artistic Pixels. They made a bunch of really cool ones, and if they're not available on the website, just reach out and Ariel will take care of you and make sure to get you whichever one that you're looking for. But the ones that I bought from JT Studios, they had some pretty cool stickers with it. So I don't know if that was a short-term promotional thing, just like, hey, the first 50 gets the ones that we tested, or what that was all about. But for anybody listening, definitely check out Artistic Pixels. And if they're not on the website, just email or hit up on social media or whatever else, and I'll definitely leave a link to that too. Dusty Do, I'm sorry if I'm getting the name wrong, but Dusty has a follow-up on Blarg McPant's question on safe power strips or surge protectors from last week. They're not sure if this is applicable to their setup, but for applications over 12 devices, they like to use PDUs designed for rack mount applications. Not only can you get them from reputable name brands with more than 12 sockets, so Triplite, StarTech, APC, CyberPower, but they find they usually work better for their setup for cable management, since all of the cables just come straight out of the back rather than going up and out from a power strip in all directions. An additional benefit to them is the on-off switch is generally on the front and easily accessible for you if you'd like to not have power going to your devices when your setup is not in use. They usually have basic surge protection built in, unless they're strictly labeled just for power distribution, but they usually plug them into a UPS, like I had recommended in case of a brownout or power loss for additional protection, and so they can save their game quickly if they lose power, if possible. Excellent suggestion. I 100% stand behind everything that you said. If that's the form factor that works for people, then by all means go for it, and thank you for sharing, because that's definitely a cool way to go about it. Todd Lamoth wanted to suggest another HDMI switch that they picked up from Princess Auto, which is like Harbor Freight in the US, that worked great with a bunch of different consoles. And while I do very much appreciate the recommendation, I was able to get one in that's very promising. It is not PS3 compatible, but it might check all of the other boxes, including being both modern and retro compatible. It was a switch that one of you recommended that was readily available and in stock, so I'm going to continue to test that. I've only been testing it for about a week, since right after I read the the post talking about it. And so far, so good, but I want another day or two to really dig in and get the little nuances of it. And then I'll write up a post and do one of those short videos on the second channel. So thank you for the recommendation. Keep them coming. But my goal is just to start picking up some of these HDMI switches and test them one at a time and then sell them when I'm done, because I have no reason to keep a bunch of HDMI switches. Basically, the goal is to put out a very short video on the second channel, put a post on the website, wait for your feedback. So give it a couple of days. And there's always awesome people that's like, oh, did you remember to test this? You know, I have that switch and it works with that, but not this or something. So then I'll update the written review and then sell it and hopefully not lose too much money on all of these things. But that's kind of my goal for the short term, is just to, you know, at least once a month, pick up a new HDMI device, test it and resell it when I'm done. Or if it's amazing, I definitely would keep it. But I'm really looking for solutions that check every single box, including matrix switching, or at least multiple in and multiple out, PS3 compatible, MiSTer compatible, the whole nine. But the more time goes on, the more I realize that's probably not realistic. So I got to look to multiple solutions when possible. So thank you very much, Todd, and to everybody else who kept the recommendations coming. I've been reading and paying attention to all of them, and hopefully we'll have a cool recommendation soon enough. Next up, Pippin wanted me to clarify what I meant by getting proper CRT mask emulation in the correct integer in that video I just did about OLED 1440p versus 4K. And essentially, in order to have CRT mask emulation line up and look right, the scale has to be a direct integer of the original. So for 240p, if you're on a 1080p monitor, it would have to be 4x or 5x. If you're on a 4K monitor, it could be 9x or 10x. I always prefer having overscan with classic video games because that matches what you would see on a CRT. So it cuts a little off the top and the bottom, but about the same or less than you would have cut off on your average quality consumer grade CRT. And it also fills a little bit more of the horizontal without stretching the aspect ratio. So overscan is always what I would prefer. And with 480p sources, sometimes that as well. Not all of them. Some 480p games fill the screen top to bottom perfectly, but others really expect you to have displays with a ton of overscan. So going to 4K 5x might actually look better for a couple of games at least than having it stretched or going to 1440p and stretching that. But essentially, it's not so much about you need a 10x scale, it's about you need an even scale. So if you have a 4.5x scale of 240p to 1080p, that's not going to line up. You'll fill the screen top to bottom, but you'll see uneven horizontal lines because it's an uneven scale. So that's basically it. If you're not using CRT mask emulation, it mostly doesn't matter anymore, especially with the higher end scales like the TINK 4K, but it's a crucial detail when you're scaling any kind of stuff with the CRT mask emulation. So for 240p, I always suggest 5x or 10x. For 480p, it's really going to be up to the game that you play. You might want to do an underscan so you have a little bit of space on the top and bottom, or at least in the case of 1440p, it would technically fill the screen top to bottom, but some games had black bars or no useful information up there anyway, but it's at least an integer scale, so all CRT mask emulation would line up. Hopefully I explained that right. If not, please let me know, and I'll try to re-explain it next week when I'm less nasally. Cosmos Kapanovich wanted to know if I could test the 4x3 480p input lag on an LG B5 OLED. I would love to, but I just have absolutely no way to do that. I would have to actually buy one in order to do the testing, and I really don't like buying stuff and returning it unless there's a legitimate reason to return it. So if I buy something to review and it's complete garbage, yeah, I have no moral issues returning it because it's garbage. But if I bought an LG B5 to review it and then just returned it saying I didn't want it anymore, that's not how I roll. I can't really do that. So my apologies. I need to either purchase or have direct access to something like that. But to continue, the ratings review implies that it has better input lag than the C5, but they suspect that maybe they just didn't set the TV to 4x3 for that test. Ratings is usually really good, but remember, they're modern focused, so they're not testing OSSC compatibility, and it's likely that they forgot or just don't test 4x3, because it probably just isn't a focus for them. So yeah, I wouldn't expect it. If the lag is actually present, can I recommend a different small TV that doesn't suffer from the 4x3 issue, not necessarily an OLED? So no, and I mean that respectfully. If you mean like a gaming monitor, yeah, the ones I just reviewed are incredible, and that 32-inch LG OLED is nuts. I really can't stress enough how blown away I was by that display. You pay for it though; it's very expensive. But as far as like a 42-inch or a 50-inch, I still would suggest the LG OLEDs. I guess there are other ones out there that you might be able to use that are probably cheaper as well, but I haven't tested any of them, and I just love the look of an OLED for gaming. So unfortunately, I'm going to be useless to you for that. Finally, if I can't answer that question, can I tell them what TV or display I currently use with the RetroTink 2X Pro? So once again, I mean this with respect. The 2X Pro is an excellent piece of equipment with no latency and completely solves a ton of problems that are in the average mainstream plug and play adapter. But once you've used a RetroTink 5X or an OSSC Pro, or especially the RetroTink 4K, you'll never go back to that. So I only use my 2Xs for testing and to use as examples in these videos. I still stand by every single word I've said about them, and I still have the same positive things to say. But once you've dropped a little cash on the more expensive ones that do a lot more things, especially like the TINK5x and 4K, where you just plug your stuff in, you don't need any of those extra settings, but everything just looks great. That's a huge upgrade. But to answer that both ways, what would I recommend with a RetroTink 2X Pro? I would recommend any cheap gaming monitor just to get you by, because a low-end scaler, a low-end monitor, you're not spending a lot of money. It's going to be a great experience overall, so you should be good there. On the flip side, I use my LG OLED for gaming still, and of course my original CRTs. But after that video, I'm seriously considering upgrading my daily desktop monitor for more testing on gaming monitors for retro. And I don't have the space, and I can't afford to just have a bunch of gaming monitors lying around. So I'd have to sell this display that I use for all my day-to-day stuff and then buy an OLED to replace it. But yeah, those are top tier, really good. And, if you wanted to start out with one of those, all of those OLEDs that I tested in that video have no added latency in 480p mode. So you could absolutely start by sending it a RetroTink 2X Pro. I don't think I remembered to test it, but I can't imagine there would be a problem with it. You'd start out that way, play your games, and then once you have a little more budget, then you upgrade the scaler. But at least you could start out and having an amazing OLED gaming monitor with no latency issues and still have good performance all around. So hopefully I was able to sort of point you in the right direction. Welcome and thank you so much for subscribing, and hopefully I'll be able to help you out better next time. Veronica has an early 2000s PC that uses VGA and alternates between 640 by 480 for some programs, but then 800 by 600 and even 1920 by 1080 for others. Their cheap VGA to HDMI adapter, of course, doesn't handle that well and ends up outputting nonsense to their capture card. First, does RetroTink 4K's VGA input scale those screen resolutions well? Yeah, probably the best out of all the scalers I've tested. Second, assuming it does, is the resulting 4K signal stable during the shifts between resolution? Yes, mostly and sort of. So if you have it in triple buffer mode, which can range between 0 and 1.5 frames of lag, there will be no dropouts at all, period. If you have it in the frame lock or gen lock mode, you might, and that'll be near zero latency, but it'll recover faster than your average scaler. And then there's some other modes you could test out that, depending on the input, maybe it'll work better, maybe it won't. But if you have it set to triple buffer, especially if you're streaming and if you're not doing anything that's super lag sensitive, like you're not in a Tetris tournament or something like that, then the triple buffer mode, you'll have basically zero dropouts. You might get some information on screen, like I'm sure you've seen this before. You'll switch resolutions and you'll get like weird info on screen, but then it only lasts about a second and there's no actual HDMI dropout. Your monitor doesn't lose signal and have to recover. You just see some weird stuff for about a second or two, and then the screen goes back to the way it should. So they would hate to freak out their capture card in the middle of a stream, which is exactly why I didn't even read to the end of your question, and I already knew you were going there, because that's a problem that a ton of us have with these streams. So yeah, absolutely the RetroTink 4K would do it. You don't need the Pro. The CE would completely do that as well. For you, Veronica, you do a lot of crazy stuff, so you might want to get the Pro just to have for future testing that you might do. or not. I don't know. Check it out and see. But yeah, that's definitely going to be a great solution for this. And just a shout out to Veronica. If you check out her channel, I watch her videos for Linux stuff as well as some of the music stuff too. So yeah, thanks to Veronica for making awesome videos as well. So I'll leave a link to her page just because why not? Well, that's it for this week. If anybody heard me rushing to the end of a question, it wasn't because I didn't want to answer the question. It was because I was trying to stop recording before I went into a coughing fit or sniffle fit or something. So no disrespect meant to anybody who I accidentally did that to. I was just trying to save all of your ears and not gross you out with sick noises. But anyway, as always, any questions that you have, please put it wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. The way these services work, it's kind of tricky to figure out what's a new question on an old post. Plus, like you saw today, I just like scrolling through in real time and answering as if we were hanging out at an expo together or something. And anybody who supports is eligible. It just very often is only on Patreon because that's the main service that people support on. But as always, thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.